Welcome to the Orange County Forum, where newsmakers keep you informed about local, national, and global issues that impact Orange County today.
All right, if I can get everybody's attention so we can get our program going here. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. All right, I'd like to remind all of you that the Orange County Forum is in its 22nd year of presenting monthly luncheons. So we'd like to continue, we are continuing to offer amazing programs. So, keep informed by going to our website and seeing who we have. Not yet confirmed what the dates are. We have our congressional update, which is always a lot of fun. A little bit of fireworks sometimes, but it's actually pretty good entertainment. Also, too, our 2014 Orange County Community Indicators Report that also is very popular with our membership. So keep your eyes on it, and we have other surprises also. Anyways, our program is going to begin. And first thing I'm going to do is introduce one of my fellow board members, Max Gardner. He's president and CEO of the Orange County United Way, and he is going to introduce our speaker. Max?
Thank you. You're very kind. Good afternoon. Our mission in OC Forum is to foster relationships, exchange ideas, and discuss public policy issues with the most knowledgeable and distinguished speakers and leaders of our time. And today's a great example of that. Edison International is the parent company for our electric utility here, Southern California Edison, as well as Edison Energy and others, organizations that touch all of our lives constantly. Edison, just for perspective, is a huge organization. In 2012, revenues were just under $12 billion for the year and assets of over $44 billion. I don't know what your balance sheet looks like, but it's a little bit different than mine. But in addition to keep their role in keeping the lights on, one of the things I'm very pleased about is Edison is very much a part of our community. They support a large number of nonprofits, and I'm pleased to say that United Way is one of the ones that they support. We have a great program that they work with us on destination graduation, but they're engaged in the community in many, many ways. They run classes and educational programs for nonprofits. They support nonprofits throughout the community. They are very much part of the fabric of our community, and we're very much appreciative of that. In his role as chairman, president, and CEO of Edison International, Ted Craver has a tremendously broad range of experiences and responsibilities. You have his biography, so I won't rattle that off for you. I'll let you look at that at your leisure. But he's been with Edison since 1996 and in his current position since 2008. But prior to joining Edison, Ted spent a number of years at high level in banking, and most recently with First Interstate Bancorp. Ted serves on a wide variety of boards, industry boards, for-profit boards, as well as nonprofit boards, including the National Conservancy. What's the proper name? Nature Conservancy. I should know that, being from the Irvine Company before. But when he's not busy running Edison, he's busy running marathons and competing in triathlons. And I also happen to know that Ted likes to hike. In fact, he's been known to take an overnight hike for a night or two into Mammoth and other parts unknown, which is by way of telling you that when the head of our local utility unplugs, he really unplugs. And he's here to talk to us today about the outlook for electricity in 2014 and beyond, and we all hope that it's much better than the outlook for water in our community is in the very near future. But please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Ted Craver.
So usually the line I give my employees is, okay, I understand there's Q&A, and if I don't get any Q's, you're going to hear about my training regimen. It usually stimulates a few questions. Nobody wants to listen to that stuff. Well, Max, thank you again for the kind introduction, and Henry, thank you for having us here. I've been looking forward to this, and I see it as a real opportunity. You may not know this, but Edison has, through its principal subsidiary, Southern California Edison, we have a 50,000 square mile service territory. And that covers many counties, but Orange County really is at the heart of our service territory. And I think of it also as a way to demonstrate one of the things that Max brought up. It's a truism for many companies, but certainly more so for a company like Edison that provides an essential service. If the communities do well that we serve, then Edison will do well. The future of the communities, of the citizens, and Edison are inextricably tied, and their well-being is inextricably tied. So it's very important, I think, for us to think in terms of how do we serve our customers, how do we serve our communities, how do we serve the state. We have many different constituents that we have to, and stakeholders that we have to try to balance interests, and being able to come to a forum like this is one of the opportunities to do that. I've been asked to give some remarks around the future of the electric grid and the future of electricity, which I will do, and I'm happy to do that. But to be frank, it's a lot more fun if you are asking questions, and I can respond to the things that are really on your mind. So I will try to actually keep my comments a little shorter than perhaps were advertised, and make a little more room for Q&A. But again, remember, the deal is if you don't ask Q's, you'll hear about my training regimen. So let me cover a couple things. I think, although of course I find electricity and electric power, the grid, things like that as just incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure all of you do too. But when you actually stop and pause to think, we would normally say, okay, what's essential to life? Water, food, kind of go down the chain. But in our modern society, it's not an overstatement to say there will not be water and there will not be food on the table if there isn't electricity. That's just the state of our modern society. So it is absolutely an essential element of our modern day life. Yet I would also say it's probably one of the least understood products from a technical standpoint, and equally it's not particularly well understood from a business standpoint. How do utilities actually work? How do they actually make money? So I want to cover just a couple things on that and then use that as a springboard to talk about some of the trends that we see over the next several years. First, let me talk about it technically. There are lots of terms that are tossed around, but one of them that gets used a lot is the grid, the electric grid. I'm going to kind of marble that into my remarks. And typically when somebody asks me, I hear this stuff about smart grid, tell me a little bit, what does that mean? And usually around third or fourth sentence, they're changing the subject to, so who do you like, Seattle or Denver? So I will not try to explain those things in a technical way to you, but I will use one factoid that kind of catches it, I think catches the essence. Part of the National Academy of Sciences is the National Academy of Engineering, and they recently went through an exercise to identify those engineering feats for the full 20th century, so all of the 20th century. What were the most important ones? And they came up with a list of 100. The top of that list was the electric grid. They viewed that as the engineering feat of the century. Just for reference, the automobile was number 2, and computers were number 8. And I think it's kind of back to that point I was making about food and water. In our modern society, virtually all of these things require electric power to make them happen. The business model, as I said, is also not particularly well understood. And I won't try to explain it, things like regulatory compact and all of that, but we'll make just 2 comments. One, I'll call this maybe dispelling misconceptions. I think one misconception that people have, and it's repeated in different ways, is that electric utilities want you to use more electricity, because the more electricity you use, the more money we make. Not true. That's not how it works. Actually, the way we make money as an investor-owned utility is we invest in the infrastructure, whether that's power plants, transmission lines, substations, you name it, all of that stuff that makes the electricity system work. And half of that investment is supported by equity. And that's equity that we get from shareholders. And we earn a regulated rate of return on that equity capital. So if we spend $100 million building a new substation, 50% of that is supported by debt, 50% supported by equity. We earn 10.45% on that 50% supported by equity. We could sell a whole bunch of electricity or not much at all. It doesn't matter. That's how we make our money. So that's one of those misconceptions that I think is a little difficult for people to understand. Another misconception is that Edison hates rooftop solar. It gets referred to in different ways depending on the ad or the robocall you're getting, but because as the theory goes, the more rooftop solar there is, the more that displaces the generation that we own and that we use to produce electricity and sell to our customers. Southern California Edison owns 12% of the generating facilities that produce the electricity we give to our customers. So said differently, we buy 7/8 of the electricity that we deliver to all of you. We don't own the generation. So we are largely indifferent as to how the electricity is actually generated. What we are very much focused on is how it's distributed, or the grid. That's really what we invest in. That is our business. A couple of other little things, just because these will come up, I think, in some of the future remarks and perhaps some of the questions. There are about 5,000, a little less than 5,000 electric entities in the United States, and they fall in three kinds of forms: investor-owned utilities, municipal or public power utilities, and co-ops. And basically this gets into the intricacies of how the infrastructure is funded, how the investments are funded. So investor-owned utilities, they get their money from the private sector. So we get equity investors, we get debt investors. And the company owns those assets, whatever the $44 billion that Max mentioned. In the United States, there are a little less than 200 investor-owned utilities, yet they own 70%, a little over actually, about 72% of all of the electric infrastructure in the country. So investor-owned utilities are a relatively small number, less than the 5,000 in total, but they own most of the electric infrastructure, and all of that electric infrastructure has been built and financed with private capital. Munis, such as City of Los Angeles has the LA Department of Water and Power. That's actually the largest municipal in the country. City of Anaheim, City of Riverside, City of Glendale, City of Pasadena, so on. These are all municipals. They don't have private equity, and the assets are owned by the community. And the final one, co-ops, of which there are the most number of companies, typically very small, typically rural, and the customers actually own the electric infrastructure. All of these companies, whether they're investor-owned utilities, munis, or co-ops, their role, as much as anything else, is trying to balance multiple interests. That's essential to really how we can be successful and essential for serving the communities and the citizens. So that becomes a critical part, and I will reference that a number of times. Of course, if you're trying to balance interests of different parties, you are trying to really deal with trade-offs in the extreme. So let me talk a little bit about the future. Not unlike probably just about every industry out there, whether it's telecommunications or it's publishing or even universities, our industry is going through a substantial transformation. The phrase I kind of use to try to capture it for our employees and other audiences is that we expect our industry to change more in the next 10 years than it has in the last 100 years. And I think, like I said, that probably could be said for many industries, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what some of those big trends are in ours. And this is important because actually our company is this year 128 years old. So we've been around for a good portion of this and really started in the early days of when electric power was developed for customers across the country. The big drivers, like in a lot of those other industries going through transformation, are public policy, particularly public policy, energy policy around environmental sustainability, and technology. So these two big drivers are really changing a lot of what we see and what we know in our industry. So I'm going to pick out 3 or 4 trends to talk about here, which I will try to get to. And so why do you care? Why should you care? What difference does it make to you? So let's start with renewables and a phrase that gets used a lot, distributed energy resources. So the public policy part's pretty obvious. People view these as resources that will be considerably cleaner than utilizing fossil fuel, whether that is coal or natural gas or petroleum. Those have been the mainstay of the fuel source for generating electricity throughout the country for decades. Roughly speaking, 5 years ago, coal represented about 50% of the fuel used to make electricity across the nation. Natural gas represented 20 to 23%, petroleum less than 1%. But you can see fossil fuels, almost 3/4 of what was used to produce electricity to give to customers. There are many states that have adopted some form of renewable energy standard or RPS, renewable portfolio standards, essentially a mandate to up the amount of generation from renewable resources. California has the most aggressive renewable portfolio standard. 33% of all the electricity delivered to our customers needs to come from renewable resources by 2020. So 1/3 from renewable resources. We're well on the way to that, and I don't see a difficulty in us being able to meet that 33% mandate, as will be the case with the other 2 investor-owned utilities in the state, PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric. California is also the most, I'll say, restrictive in how they define what a renewable resource is. So it's geothermal, it's wind, it's solar, biomass. There are lots of different forms of that, but a lot of it is methane gas coming from landfills, and small hydro, under 35 megawatts of hydroelectric. So the big hydroelectric facilities, of which we have some pretty substantial ones, are not counted as a renewable resource. Even though they are renewable, they're just not counted. For us, roughly speaking, about 50% of the renewables that we use to meet the standard come from geothermal. Roughly 20% comes from wind, and then it scatters down from there. The fastest growing segment, however, is solar. So why would you care? Why does this make a difference to you? I think it actually speaks a little bit to the trade-off. By bringing in 33% renewables, it makes the generation mix in California, which is already about the cleanest of any of the states, it makes it even cleaner. So that's a positive to all of us who live here. It also is more expensive. So it's one of those trade-offs that I was talking about, balancing of interests. It leads me to the second big trend, which is a little more under the hood for our business, but it's something that you're hearing a lot more about, and I think you will yet hear more about it in the future. And that is the way the grid was developed going back 130, 40, 50 years ago is really to serve industrial load, mining in particular, and they had big motors that ran pieces of equipment related to mining, crushers and the like. And you would have a big generating station that would produce a lot of electricity, shove it down these big wires called transmission lines, and then ultimately out to the distribution system to individual homes and factories. So think of it as the heart and the arteries and the capillaries. That's the generation station. The arteries are the transmission, the capillaries are the distribution system. And it meant to be one-way flow. You just push the electricity out to those who use it. When you have things like rooftop solar or micro turbines at a factory or bloom box, fuel cell type of technology, that's generation that's located out at the very end of the system, out at the capillaries. And so instead of coming from the central out, you're now actually generating electricity right where it's being used and distributed. That's a huge difference in terms of how this complicated technical thing works that I'm not going to explain to you. So what we are increasingly faced with is there's some real benefits to distributed generation. Having things like rooftop solar or microgrids or microturbines can actually offer a cleaner solution to generating electricity. It also can offer, in some important ways, better resiliency of the system. So Hurricane Sandy's, things of that nature, you actually can have a faster recovery with distributed generation in some cases, if it's located well. You also can have just generally more reliability, again, if it's managed properly. So we see a lot of promise in distributed generation, but that turns the industry kind of upside down, turns the models upside down, and gets companies fighting with each other about whether it's going to be building distributed generation or building central plant generation. I think we're going to see a mix, and what is most essential in all of this is that we have a grid, particularly a distribution system, that can absorb generation out at the end and can do it in a way that is robust and flexible. And if we do that, that will also provide substantially more flexibility to customers and more choice to customers as to how they actually consume electricity and can generate their own electricity. Which brings me to the third piece I want to talk about, which is the value of the grid. As technology has evolved, I'm going to use two different examples, but let's start with a factory. Many factories today are exceptionally automated, and most of that automation, whether it's, say, a production line or what have you, is really managed with microprocessors, little computers that are embedded in the equipment or in the control systems. Those microprocessors are very sensitive, and the electricity that they use to do their work must stay within extremely fine tolerances. If there's just a momentary, literally a split-second surge outside of a very narrow band, either below or above, it essentially causes the microprocessor to hiccup. And when it hiccups, it misses some of the steps. When it misses some of the steps in the logic, it goes blank. So you can shut down an entire assembly line just by having a momentary surge in the quality of electricity that goes through the grid. This is made even more complicated if you have local electric systems. So distributed generation or microgrids, as they're sometimes called, at the plant site can make that balancing of the power quality even more difficult. Another example would be, you may have noticed this, but sometimes when you're in the kitchen and the refrigerator goes on and something else goes on, you'll see the lights just dip down, just a little momentary thing. Or if you turn on a pool pump or some big user of electricity in your house, you'll see just a little dip in the lights. That's an essential part of any kind of large electrical device. And if you don't want to completely interrupt the system, you need to have enough pressure, if you will, in the pipe for that surge to be very momentary and to be covered. This is all part of power quality, voltage regulation, and the like. If you don't have the grid finely tuned, you will have that in spades. So it's less about do we have enough electricity, it's often more about the power quality that we have within the grid. So all of these things are requiring higher and higher power quality, all of the new technologies, and the grid has to keep pace, which requires a pretty significant amount of investment. So whether it's distributed energy resources, or whether it's a central plant versus this DG issue, distributed generation, or whether it's the power quality, the central ingredient in all of that is the electric system, the grid. We need to invest a substantial amount of money to keep that system in check, to make sure that it is even more resilient and flexible as these new technologies come online. Today, our industry, just the investor-owned utilities, that group that owns around 70% of the assets in the country, is investing about $80 billion, that's a B, $80 billion a year on the electric system. Southern California Edison is investing about $4 billion a year on the electric system. And in our case, because we don't really do much on the generation side, we buy that. Our almost all of that investment, 92% of that $4 billion, is going to keeping the grid viable, keeping it refurbished, keeping it strong. Final piece of how all of this affects all of you is customer rates are actually fairly simple to understand. It's a simple fraction. All of the costs of building and maintaining and operating the system are in the numerator, the thing on the top, and kilowatt hours that are produced and used are the denominator. If the rate of growth in costs is higher or faster than the rate of growth in the use of electricity, then tariffed rates have to go up. Pretty simple. Kind of pretty logical too. If costs go up faster than the usage, then the rate to recover all of those costs has to go up as well. This has been a challenge for all of the electric industry across the country since around 2000.
I'd like to thank you for your comments here today and turn this back over to Henry.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our speaker, Mr. Ted Craver, again. Another round of applause. I don't know about you guys. I had a lot of questions, and then you answered most of them. I think you're very thorough in what's going on out there. I think electricity touches all of us, like you made that point. So thank you very much for coming. See you next event.
The Orange County Forum is brought to you through the generous support of the Orange County Register and our sustaining partners. For more information about the Orange County Forum, call 949-588-9884. The Orange County Forum is a nonprofit organization. Your contributions are tax deductible.